We're going to be in Romans 10 again tonight. It'll be the last night in Romans 10, and we'll be taking a break from Romans for a little while, not exactly sure how long, quite possibly until Easter. Next Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. It is traditionally, year after year, the highest attended Wednesday night church service in the world, and it is the third highest attended service behind Easter and Christmas, or Christmas Eve. Those two usually get counted together. I don't know why I'm grabbing the remote instead of my phone. Did I already put it up there? I need it for my Bible. No, I did not. Okay, my brain is fried today. And thinking about how many people show up to church on Ash Wednesday and on Easter Sunday and Christmas shows how many people are aware and have some pull towards a relationship with God, and yet aren't there the rest of the year. They don't have that as a regular thing. And that's not even, I'm not trying to say that church attendance is one of the 10 deadlies or anything like that. I mean, I'm not saying you have to attend any particular service, any particular way. Okay, that's not good. What did I do with it? I put it right up here on top of this. That's what I did with it. I told you, my brain is gone. But I point that out not to try to make anybody feel bad or condemn anyone who may be listening online for not attending a church service, but simply to say that there is ample evidence that there is a large contingency of people who have heard the gospel, who know about our faithful God, who find themselves with distance on a regular basis. And then we've seen, and many of us have even been a part of and experienced, this dryness that leads us to fall away. And then, of course, we may know of people, we've heard people speak with hurt and anger from their declarations of being atheist and their just complete refusal to believe in a God who usually, if you talk to them, it's a God who would allow this or a God who would allow that. There are a lot of reasons people fall away. There are a lot of reasons for atheism. But the two most prevalent are Christians who serve God with their mouths and proclaim Jesus with their lips, and yet have no difference in their lives from the evil of the world around them, and or expectations and understanding not being fulfilled. What do I mean by that last one? God is faithful. We declare that on a regular basis. He is a faithful God. We say things like, Jesus is the answer. But if that's true, then why did this happen? If God is faithful and He keeps His promises, and God is the God that healeth thee, then why am I still suffering in this area? And usually when we don't get the answer we want, and it might not even have started with us, we start looking at others. And if God is a faithful God, and if God is the healer, and God is the protector, and God is this, and God is that, if God is a God that restores and a God who heals, why, after 10 years, is my mother's back still so bad? Why did so-and-so die of cancer when the whole church gathered around to pray? Why wasn't he healed or she healed? Why did we all get together and pray for so-and-so's job so that they could make it, and then they didn't get the job, or they lost the job, and then they wound up losing the house and the car? And why are there Christians tonight who will starve to death or die from exposure in the cold? Paul is addressing this kind of question in Romans because we talked about it in Romans 8, those wonderful promises. All things work together for the good for them who are the called. If you belong to God, all things work together for good. And then a little bit later on in that chapter, in that section of the letter, he got through saying that I am persuaded, I am convinced, I know that nothing can separate us. Neither height nor depth, angels, principalities, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And he's writing this letter to the church in Rome. And the natural question that comes out of that is, we hear what you're saying, but if that's true, isn't that the promise He made to Israel? I will be your God, and you will be my people. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and I will make you a blessed nation. Isn't that the same promise He made to Abraham? And if so, isn't it the same nation of Israel that is over here subject to Rome, defeated, broken, in bondage, subject to another nation? Why is Rome prospering while Israel does not? Why isn't Israel prospering? If God is a faithful God, if He keeps His word, can we trust God's word? Is He really faithful to complete? You said the work that He began, He will complete. Is He really faithful to do that? Because if He is, why is this happening with Israel? If the word is true that says, train up a child in the way he shall go, and when he is old he will not depart from it, why is the preacher's son in prison? What's going on with that? And so, can I trust God? That's the question that rises up. Is there a problem with that? Is God's word really faithful? Is He really faithful, and is He really able? And that's what Paul's addressing here. We're going to back up a little bit over stuff that we already talked about, starting with verse 13, and then go to the end of the chapter. For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. How then shall they call on Him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in Him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But I say, had they not heard? Yes, indeed. Their sound has gone out to all the earth, and their words to the ends of the world. But I say, did Israel not know? First, Moses says, I will provoke you to jealousy by those who are not a nation. I will move you to anger by a foolish nation. But Isaiah is very bold and says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I was made manifest to those who did not ask for me. But to Israel he says, all day long I have stretched out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. That verse, that last verse right there goes really hard against what we talked about when we covered chapter 9, that idea that the sovereignty of God means that nothing happens outside of His will. God is a sovereign God. But this statement right here proves that there are things that happen outside of His will. Because He says, I have stretched out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. He's calling out to the nation of Israel here. He is calling out to believers. He is calling out to His people who know Him and saying, come to me. And they're not. They're being contrary to His will. They're being disobedient. That means He's not getting what He wants. So there's one of two problems. The problem is either the source. God's word is not His word. He is not faithful. He is not able. Or the problem is somewhere else. And Paul says here that the problem is a problem of unbelief. The problem's not on God's end. It's not on God's end. It's on our end. If Jesus is the answer, and there's almost no one in the United States who has not heard about Jesus in some way, shape, form, or fashion, why is the nation in such a mess? Why is there so much evil? Why are we going further and further away from God as a nation instead of closer to Him? Jesus is being proclaimed. In almost every city in America, there is a church on almost every block. It seems like sometimes that some towns have more churches than they have people. So why? The problem is not with the message. The problem is not with the gospel. The problem is not with Jesus. The problem is not with the source. We live out on the edge of Suddenlink Cable's service area. And when we first moved out there, it was important for us to get internet because Leah's college classes are online. So in order for her to attend school, she has to be able to get online, and it has to be dependable. And I know that there are satellite services for people out in the boonies, but sometimes when the weather's bad, different things, the internet goes down or it slows down or it's splotchy. And the last thing we need is for the internet to go down in the middle of Leah taking a test. So we wanted to get a hard line, cable line, something that wasn't going to go down when the wind blew real hard like the electricity does in Appleby more times than not. So I called Suddenlink and tried to get them to come out and hook our service up. And they don't serve our address. We are beyond the area. They could do it, but they would have to add a pole and extend out to us, and they were going to charge us for that. And I'm broke. And I said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. My parents live 50 feet. Actually, it's probably more like 150, but they're right next door. And they've got cable, phone, and internet through you. My neighbors directly across the street from us, I know they have internet because if I go to the end of my driveway, I can pick up their Wi-Fi signal. And I know it's with you. So how is it that I can't get service? Well, we can do it. We just got to put up a pole. Anyway. So what we wound up doing was we got my mother to add a line. And I said, fine, if Suddenlink can't run a line, I can. I worked for quite a while running and installing audio and visual sound systems and things like that. I know how to run a cable line. So we paid for an extra modem and an extra line, and I hooked in at my mom's house. And I went to Lowe's and I bought cable, and I ran cable, and I put different connectors here and there and worked it all up, and now we have basic cable and internet at our house. But I didn't want to spend the $12 to $15 or so for the clamps that squeeze the connectors onto the cable. Yeah, James is laughing at me because he knows what happens. Now, the internet is tight and it's good and it pretty much never goes down. But from time to time, quite more often than I would like, I go to watch a show with my wife, and I have gotten in the habit now, because I still haven't gone and bought that stupid clamp, so I make it a habit of doing it at least 5 minutes before our show's going to come on. I turn on my TV. Now, the way this is supposed to work, when you have basic cable, you turn on your TV, and there's a picture, right? I turn on my TV, and quite often it says, no signal. And at this point, I have to backtrack. I have to go over to the house, and I have to check and make sure that that cable hadn't come out of that connection. I usually check that one first because although I have to walk the furthest, that's the easiest one. If that one is in, then I have to go back and I have to crawl underneath the house, and I have to find where it has come undone, and I have to put it back together. Now, Suddenlink is not as faithful as God, and there are times when their signal actually is down. There are times when everything is hooked up and they don't have a signal. So this illustration kind of falls short right there. But for the most part, it's right. See, the problem's not with the cable. The problem's not with the source. The problem is somewhere along the line of where that's supposed to happen, how it's supposed to happen. The signal's just fine. It doesn't matter that the TV says low signal or no signal. The signal is fine. The problem is the signal's not getting where it's supposed to get. And that's not the signal's fault. I put it all back together again. Sometimes I call or text Leah from underneath the house before I crawl back out just to make sure. Is it on? Yep, it's on. All right, now I crawl back out and we're good to go. Electricity is the same way. Problem's not the electricity. If you've got a loose connection somewhere along the line, you have to backtrack from the light bulb to the switch, from the switch to the box, from the box to the pole, from all those different things. The problem's not that there's no juice. It's not that there's not a line, that there's a line down somewhere. The problem is somewhere there's a connection that's not reaching where it's supposed to be. And God set up a blueprint. We see it. This is kind of echoing on me a little bit. It's a little hot. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. We see it. I'm going to go a little bit backwards. Trace it back. Verse 15. How shall they preach unless they are sent? So somebody has to be sent for the gospel to do what it's supposed to do. For the light to come on in the world, somebody has to be sent. And when they're sent, they have to declare the message. And they can only declare the message that the message has to be declared in order for people to hear. And they have to hear in order to believe. And they have to believe in order to call upon the name of the Lord. And they have to personally call upon the Lord to be delivered. It's not that God can't deliver them. The signal's not reaching. So Paul addresses that. And he makes it clear in verse 15 when he quotes that, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. That people have been sent. And they have heard. Because he says, it has gone out to all the earth. So where's the problem? Why is it not making the desired effect? Verse 18, I believe. Let me see. 16, I'm sorry. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. They didn't respond. And part of that is a misunderstanding of what God intended. See, I have basic cable. But when I turn on the TV and I try to turn on NFL Red Zone on Sunday afternoons, I don't get it. Because basic cable does not include the NFL Red Zone. It's not supposed to. And sometimes we don't get those answers that we get so confused about because that's not what was promised in the first place. We get mad at God and say He's not being faithful to fulfill His word when we're putting words in His mouth, and He never ever said that. When He declared that He is the God that heals, He doesn't say that we're never going to struggle, that there won't be suffering, that there won't be death. He says that He is the God that restores and heals even from that. But it's not an instantaneous deal where, oh man, I have a headache, so I pray, and if that headache doesn't go away in 5 seconds, God wasn't faithful. That's not what that means. And we can get upset about that, but that's a result of the curse. But for those who believe, even that can be used for His good. And there will come a time, not on this side of eternity, but on the other, when we will be made complete, whole, and new, and all that suffering will end, and we will be completely healed, completely restored, and completely new. But it was never promised to us on this side of eternity. Now, yes, there are healing. Lazarus was raised from the dead. People even today are prayed for and get up out of wheelchairs and walk. But there's a minister, female minister named Joni, who paints beautiful pictures with a brush in her mouth and has ministered and written books and preached since I was a little bitty thing, and she has done it paralyzed. She's been paralyzed since she was a teenager, and that has never changed. And it doesn't mean that God's not faithful. Sometimes He shows His glory by what He can take us through rather than delivering us from it. He didn't keep Daniel from going into the lion's den. He protected him while he was there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went into the fire. They just came out of it. So sometimes we've got to go through those things. I was doing some research on lupus because my wonderful wife has lupus, and I wanted to know a little bit more about it. I wanted to understand it a little bit more because it's not a fun disease, and it is an incurable disease. It's a treatable disease, but it's incurable. And somewhere, thanks to Google, the weird way it sends you off on tangents, I found out something kind of interesting. Something that kind of shocked me that I had never heard, did not know. I don't know how many of us here are familiar with him, but has anyone ever heard of a man named Ted Turner? Turner Classic Movies, TNT, that guy. He's a pretty well-known, rich, self-proclaimed atheist. And he is very anti-Christian and has stood in opposition to a lot of Christian causes in this country. That's pretty common knowledge. What I did not know was that he was a Christian who had a very sincere prayer life and out of his own choice went to a Christian school and had plans to go into mission work as a teenager. Very devoted to his faith. And his sister got lupus. And after a 5-year struggle with him and everyone praying for her, she died. And he could not reconcile her death with what he believed about God. So he turned his back on God and walked away from the faith. If God doesn't do what he said, or if I can't trust him with my family, how can I trust him with myself? If I can't trust him with my friends, how can I trust him with myself? The problem is, we were promised eternal, everlasting life, but we were not promised that this body would continue. That's not the words that he said. We're putting our expectations and desires on God. So the problem with unbelief is unbelief. It sounds kind of redundant. But it's an important thing to understand. It's an important thing to know when we see that things not coming through. God made some awesome promises to Israel, and Rome's looking, going, I'm not seeing this. These people are subject to us. They are a conquered nation. They're not blessed. The whole world's not being blessed through them. They're not being blessed. We're not being cursed for cursing them. And I haven't seen anybody lately be blessed for blessing them. So what's going on? And the thing that it matters is, the question is, how do we approach it? When we look at it, is it a problem with God or is it a problem with us? It's a matter of the heart. See? People don't believe. Is the problem with the message? See, some would say yes. They wouldn't actually say that. But they say it with their actions. We've probably all been guilty of it to some extent or another. You know, you want to share to somebody or you want to witness to somebody, and you kind of leave some parts of it kind of over here and trying to pump up the stuff you think they'll like. You know, hey, I love Christian music. I love Christian rock. I was listening to Stryper back in the early 80s when half the churches in this country were picketing against them. So I got nothing against Christian rock and all that kind of stuff. I love it. Even if it wasn't for ministry purposes and it's just entertainment, I've got nothing wrong with that, because providing a good, clean entertainment versus some of the stuff that's available in the secular is not a bad thing. But how many times have we seen it where, if we're going to reach youth, we've got to take what the world's offering and kind of shape gospel to fit in that, to make it more palatable. As though the problem were with the message. The problem's not with the message. The problem's with the heart hearing the message. There was a period in the late 1800s where some pretty heresy things got started in the Christian church with people who wanted to reach the world, and they realized that this world that had begun to rationalize everything could no longer believe in miracles. We couldn't believe in miracles, so they stopped telling them. They stopped saying that Jesus fed 5,000 people. What they said was He taught them how to share. So everybody got along. Which actually to me would be a bigger miracle than just making fish multiply. Getting a mob of hungry people to share their food, that's a pretty big miracle. They said it wasn't dry land in the Red Sea. See, there's this phenomenon that happens every so often with tides and the position of the moon and weather patterns and this, that, and the other. For every so often, the Red Sea actually recedes to the point where it's 2 to 3 foot deep. What He did was He made it during one of those periods that they left Egypt, and so they waded across. It wasn't dry land like the Scripture actually says. And once again, I think that's a bigger miracle, because if that's the case, not only did they get all their carts through without getting stuck, but God then drowned the entire Egyptian army in 2 foot of water. Lazarus wasn't really dead. He was just real sick, and they misdiagnosed him. I mean, the problem's not with the message. We don't change the message. But that problem affects how we treat it. I get a headache. I start thinking that something's wrong with my glasses. What I really need to do is drink a cup of coffee, because I haven't had any coffee that day, and I'm addicted to caffeine. And so when I don't drink my coffee in the morning, I get caffeine withdrawal, which gives me a headache. Or I get a headache, and I think I'm going through caffeine withdrawal, so I drink a cup of coffee, but it's not really helping anything, because what's wrong is my prescription has changed in my glasses. Diagnosing the problem accurately is the first step to fixing it. Because when you treat it with the wrong diagnosis, you provide the wrong treatment. So when we start thinking that the problem is on God's end because He's not faithful, because something needs to be tweaked with His gospel, then we're misdiagnosing the problem, and no treatment that we give it will make anything better. But when we realize that the problem is with the heart of those who are hearing, we're not messing with His end. We're fixing the connections. Then the Word can be proclaimed undoctored, unfiltered, the way it was supposed to be proclaimed, which will enable people to hear the way they were supposed to hear. Because if they're going to hear something that's going to change their life, it has to be the truth. It's the truth that will make us free. When we change what's being spoken to try to sell it and make it more palatable, we make it no longer the unadulterated truth. And then we wonder why they're not as free. Because it doesn't work that way. Water down some gasoline so it'll go a little bit further, and then pour it in your engine. Find out how far you drive down the road. It doesn't work. That's not how to stretch your gas money. And watering down the truth does not cause the fire to burn. It just doesn't work. Now, I see it in an area that's important to me quite often. How does this work? Well, every spiritual struggle that we have is a result of unbelief. That's a pretty radical statement, but it's true. It's kind of scary. Now, I'm not saying that every battle we have is a result of unbelief. That every time we have something come against us is because your faith wasn't strong enough. That's not what I'm saying. That's baloney from the devil. You will have trials and tribulations. It's going to happen. If you're not having any trials and tribulations, you might want to check your walk. Not saying if your faith is strong, you won't have difficulty. What I'm saying is when we're struggling spiritually, it's because we're having trouble believing who He is, what He said, and His love for us. The ones who can believe with pure belief can lay dying from pain and say, I'm ready to go home. Not, my God, why am I dying of cancer? They're just going, I want to go home. There's a difference. There's a difference. There are people who have tried to take God out of the solution to addiction problems. And they've been doing it in rehab centers for years now. What they have found is a lot of people going in and out of rehab. It's not working as well anymore. Because, see, they misdiagnosed the problem. The problem with addiction is a spiritual one. They don't treat it that way, so they start saying things like, be careful of your triggers, be careful where you go, learn these anger management techniques, and some of those things may work for a little while in certain circumstances. But sooner or later, they're going to fail. And sooner or later, every real addict and alcoholic like I am, is going to realize that my number one trigger was breathing. I only drank and used on days that ended in Y. My favorite drug was more. And all the coping techniques in the world couldn't stop that beast from crawling back up on my back and beating me up sooner or later. Because I couldn't use my broken mind and my broken heart and my broken soul to fix my brokenness. Didn't work. Because I misdiagnosed the problem. But when I accepted that the problem was a spiritual problem, that I was trying to fill a God-shaped hole in my life with something that wasn't God, that the problem was that I was trying to manage and control and run my own life when that's His job and not mine, and surrendered my will and my life to the care of that God that loves me and wants to restore me. Now I'm coming up on 6 years clean and sober. That worked. And I've gotten hungry since then, and I've gotten angry since then, and I've gotten lonely since then, and I've gotten tired since then, and I've hurt, and I've been exhausted, and I've been mad. I've been all those things they tell you that if you can just avoid, you won't use. I've been all those things and didn't use. Because it wasn't me. It was Him. We have that problem in relationships. And we start going, if I figure out how to meet their need a certain way, they'll meet mine. If I figure out how to talk to them in a way that they can understand and we can communicate better, then everything will work itself out. And it'll all get better. The problem is that one or both, at that moment, when there is an issue, are focused on themselves instead of focused on Him. Or looking to themselves or their relationship for something that he's supposed to be the answer for. That one or both of the people involved are not completely really believing anymore. They're just going through it. And they're trying to fix the message instead of changing the heart. It's the problem with the nation. We're trying to change politicians. We're in the middle of that right now. We elect the right guy, it's going to fix everything. We elect the wrong thing and we're doomed. No. If we as a people do not change our hearts and give God control of our lives, then you can elect the perfect candidate and we're all doomed. And if we as a people will change our hearts and believe in Him who is our protector and our healer and our restoration, then it wouldn't matter if Stalin was in charge. We're going to be okay. There were some Christians who lived blessed lives in concentration camps under Hitler. There were some Christians who rejoiced in the love of their Lord as they faced the firing squad under Stalin. The answer is not making everything more comfortable. The answer is not in who's in the White House. Jesus really is the answer. And it's not going to make all your problems disappear. It's not going to make everything rosy this side of eternity. It's not going to make the road smooth. But it will change how we travel it. It will change whether we're laying there dying, angry, hurt, bitter, and miserable, or whether we're laying there dying with some peace and some joy, looking forward to finally seeing His face. That's the healing that's coming. That's real cheery, right? You're still going to die. But it's the truth. There are going to be hard times. And looking at the lives of other people with expectation of, I prayed that they would get that job and they didn't, or I prayed that that cancer would be healed and it wasn't. I prayed that that mental illness would be straightened out and it wasn't. So I can't believe in God anymore. That's putting the blame on God for something that's not on Him. Never was on Him. It's always been a result of our choices and our sin. Before we get too busy blaming Adam, I firmly believe that there is not a one of us that if we had been in his place, it might not have happened the same way, it might not have happened the same time, but sooner or later we would have decided we wanted to be our own God and stop being ruled by him, because that's what he did. I want to live for me and not for him. Because we do that all the time. Knowing the destruction it caused when he did it. Seeing the destruction that it has caused in our own life. The evil that we're upset with God for in the world being a direct result of us wanting to be our own God and rule our own life. We still make that choice every day. At least I do. At least once a day. I can stop right now and I can think, yeah, I did that because I wanted to. That was me. I wish that wasn't the case. Now, how bad those are, how big those are, that can change. How often those happen, there's the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, lust, wrath, gluttony. I don't remember them all. Sloth. I usually don't do all 7 at the same time in the same minute anymore. Now they're more spread out. Fewer and fewer. less consequences, because I get back where I need to be more quickly. But I can't blame God for the evil that happens in my life when I try to play God. And I can't turn my back on Him because the signal's not getting through. And blame Him because I don't have picture on my TV. When I know good and well that the problem is that I didn't take the time to make sure the connection was what it needed to be. So I need to fix the connection. And if I get tired enough and want to quit having to crawl down on my hands and knees and fix that connection, then I'll do what I know I need to do to get it clamped. And that's surrender. Stop insisting that it's going to be okay. I can get by. I don't want to pay that cost. And just surrender. Clamp it down. Let Him have the control and let the signal come through all the time. The more I do that, the less I have to spend crawling around in the dirt and the mud, banging my head underneath the house, broken, because I insisted that it'd be all right, I'm going to do it my way. That's on my mind tonight because I turned the TV on not long before we came up here and no signal. And I know that before I watch anything again, I'm going to have to crawl up underneath the house one more time. I know exactly where the problem is. Because when I fixed it yesterday, I knew it wasn't going to last long. Because it felt a little tight. There's a little tension there. A limb or something must have fallen on it somewhere at some point. But that's not Suddenlink's fault. And people are killing each other tonight in the name of greed and selfishness and sin. And that's not Jesus' fault. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. It was always God's plan for the nations and the Gentiles to be reached through Israel. God's ideal was that Israel would accept the Messiah, and through the changes that happened in the nation of Israel, and as a result of Jesus, the whole world would know. But Israel didn't want to change their hearts. They wanted to change what God said. That's not the way they wanted the Messiah to come. So they didn't recognize Him. That's not what they wanted. They wanted a warrior. They wanted a social. They didn't want the Messiah that was the sacrificial lamb. They wanted the mighty king. So they rejected the one that came. And because of that, they lost the signal. They couldn't hear. Because they couldn't hear, they couldn't believe. Because of that, the blessings that were promised them didn't come. But it wasn't because God's not faithful. Sometimes things not changing in our life. If God's always present, why don't I feel Him? Just because you don't feel Him doesn't mean He's not there. Don't try to change Him. You better make yourself known. Change your heart. Then the signal can get through. Call on Him and He is quick to answer. He is faithful. Jesus is the answer. The good news is that we can be made new. That we can have a relationship with God. And we don't need to be changing that or watering that down or putting words in God's mouth that will drive people away when they don't come true. Father, I thank You that Your word is sufficient as it is, that it is true, that You are faithful to complete the work that was begun, that You don't rely on our feelings. Father, help us to hold on to Your truth and remember that anytime there's a problem with the signal, the problem is with us and our hearts and not with You. You are the source. You are faithful. Seal that in our heart. In Jesus' name. Amen.